Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're venturing into the darkest corners of America's wilderness, places where the trail ends, the road bends, and the night swallows every sound. I'll be sharing a collection of true encounters and chilling legends from remote mountains, shadowed forests, and lonely backroads across the country. These aren't campfire myths. These are real experiences that linger long after the sun goes down. So grab a blanket, kill the lights, and settle in for a journey where beauty meets terror. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and share your own eerie stories in the comments. Now, let's begin. Story 1. The Man I Saw at Laurel Gap. Back in 2009, I took 2 weeks off to hike alone along the Blue Ridge Parkway. I'd done solo trips before, but this one was meant to be different. A kind of reset. I'd just gone through a rough breakup and needed something quiet, far from towns, far from people. I wanted to feel small beneath trees, to wake up to birdsong and fall asleep with nothing but the crackle of fire. That's all I wanted. I started from a trailhead just north of Asheville and planned to loop down through Laurel Gap and camp at one of the high ridge sites before circling back around. I had my topo maps, food for 10 days, and a weather report that promised nothing worse than a bit of fog. The first 3 days were uneventful in the best way. Nights were still, cool, and uneventful. Days passed slowly, pine-scented and full of silence. It was on the 4th morning that I first saw him. I had just finished breaking camp and was cutting through a thinning stretch of forest maybe a mile from Laurel Gap. There, about 30 feet off trail, I saw an old man sitting motionless on a low tree stump. His back was straight, hands on his knees. He wore an olive green coat, the kind old forest rangers used to wear, with neat brass buttons and a flat collar. His boots were clean, not fresh out of the box clean, but clean in a way that didn't match the mud and leaf litter around him. He wasn't moving, not blinking, just sitting. His eyes followed me. I stopped and gave a polite wave, the way you do out here, a nod or a greeting even if you don't want to chat. But he didn't respond, didn't tilt his head or raise a hand, just sat there, still as bark. The thing was, he didn't look lost or sick. He didn't look confused. His eyes were clear, focused. That, in some ways, was worse. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something from him. A grunt, a shift, a blink. Nothing. I finally turned and kept walking, trying to shake the cold weight building in my stomach. Every few steps I glanced back, half expecting he'd stood up and started walking behind me, but the forest stayed still. Hours passed and the trees grew thicker again as I moved toward one of the ridge campsites I'd marked on my map. It wasn't official, just a flat patch of land with a fire ring someone had made years back. It overlooked a sharp drop and offered a view across the valley that usually caught the sunset real nice. I got there around 5, set up my tent. I started boiling water for dinner. The sun was already bleeding into the trees. That's when I saw him again. Same man, same coat, same stump. Only now he was sitting 20 yards away, just past the edge of the ridge, where the brush thins into rock. There was no trail to that spot. No way he could have beaten me there without me seeing. I froze with my spoon halfway to my mouth. He wasn't looking at me this time, just staring out across the valley like he was watching something far away. The stump he sat on, if it was even the same one, looked dry and rotted, like it had been there for decades, like it had been waiting for him. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I just watched him for nearly half an hour. He never blinked, never shifted. Eventually, darkness crept in and he disappeared into shadow. I convinced myself he must have walked off silently while I blinked. I crawled into my tent. I tried to tell myself he was just another hiker. Maybe odd, maybe old, maybe something was just off in my head. Alone in the woods, your brain starts making shapes where there aren't any. That's what I told myself. Around 2 a.m. I woke up scratching, not loud, just faint, slow and deliberate, like a stick across canvas. It was coming from the back of the tent, just one side, then it stopped, dead quiet. I stayed still, holding my breath, straining to hear footsteps, leaves, anything, nothing. I finally unzipped the flap and looked out toward the fire ring where the embers still barely glowed, and there he was, sitting, same coat, same posture, same stump. But this time there was no stump. He was just sitting in the dirt, still staring. I blinked and he didn't move. The firelight flickered across his face but didn't make it to his eyes. I didn't hear him arrive. No footsteps, no snapping twigs, no breathing. Just there. I zipped the tent closed and held my knife, wide awake until dawn. Every so often I'd unzip and look again. Each time he was a little closer, first by the fire ring, then maybe 10 feet from the tent, then closer, never standing, never walking, just closer, sitting, always staring. I'd leave the flap closed for what felt like an hour, then look again, and he'd be nearer. I tried yelling once, nothing, just silence. I couldn't hear the forest anymore, no owls, no wind, like something had wrapped the trees in gauze. At first light, I didn't even pack. I left my gear, my food, everything, just grabbed my water and sprinted back toward the trail. I didn't look back, not once. I kept running until my legs gave out, then walked until they burned again. It took me 2 days to reach a ranger station near Craggy Gardens. I must have looked half crazed, dirt-covered and wild-eyed. I told the woman behind the desk everything. The man, the stump, the night outside my tent. Her expression didn't change until I said the word Laurel. She froze. Then she asked me, "Did you see Laurel?" I thought she meant the tree. I asked what she was talking about. She looked around like she wasn't sure if she should speak, then leaned in and whispered, "Some folks see him up there, always alone, always sitting, don't talk, don't blink, doesn't age, been seen for years." I asked who he was. She didn't know. Nobody did. Some people think he's a spirit, but not in the religious sense. Not anything with closure, just something old, something that stays. Some say he appears to people who walk too long alone, who carry too much grief or silence in their pack, like he's drawn to that kind of quiet. He never follows you, she added, but he remembers who you are. I don't hike solo anymore. Sometimes I dream I'm back at Laurel Gap. Then I turn around and there's a man just sitting, waiting, and each time I blink, he's closer. I wake up before I see his face, but somehow I know he remembers mine. Story 2. The Screaming Post near Cold Ashbald. In the summer of 2017, I took a week off work and set out to hike a solo loop near Cold Ashbald. I'd done a lot of hiking before, but always with a buddy or a group. This time felt different, not because I was alone, but because I wanted it that way. I'd just lost my father to cancer, and I guess something about the quiet of the woods felt like the only place where I could breathe right. I wasn't running from anything, really, just looking for stillness. I figured the forest would give it to me. The loop trail wasn't on any official map. I found it through a forum where folks talked about forgotten trails and old logging roads, places where you could walk for days and not see another soul. Cold Ashbald was mentioned a few times, not as a destination, but as something folks pass through, usually without stopping. Beautiful, but heavy, one guy wrote. I thought I knew what he meant. There are places in Appalachia where the silence has a shape, places that don't want anything from you, but also don't seem to care whether you leave. The first day was gorgeous, overcast, cool enough to hike for hours without sweating too much. The woods were dense but not unfriendly. Maples and rhododendron winding together in that way where sunlight barely makes it to the dirt. I passed old stone walls crumbling into moss, and once a rusted wagon wheel half buried in ferns. Signs of people, but nothing recent. That night, I camped near a dry creek bed and slept without dreaming. It was the second night when things shifted. I'd made it about 12 miles into the loop and found a small clearing ringed by tall pines, just wide enough to pitch my tent and build a small fire. The air had gone still, not storm still, but dead. No wind, no birdsong, just a hush, like the forest was holding its breath. I tried not to think too hard about it. Trees do that sometimes. The mountains have their moods. Around 10 p.m., I was about to crawl into my tent when I heard it. A scream. Not an animal. Not the shriek of a fox or the scream bark of a bobcat. This was a man. A grown man yelling for help. Hello! That's what it sounded like. Clear, echoing, but weirdly directionless. The sound bounced in the trees like it couldn't settle on a path. I stood frozen for a second, then grabbed my flashlight and stepped toward the sound. I wasn't thinking, just moving. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the guilt of doing nothing. My dad had always said, if you hear someone calling for help in the woods, you go. So I went. The voice came again. Same tone, same words. But it didn't sound closer or farther. Just the same. Like a recording being played back. I followed it maybe a quarter mile uphill, my boots scraping against old roots and loose rock. The deeper I went, the more the air smelled wrong, damp, like rot. Then I saw the clearing. It was small, maybe 10 feet across, surrounded by fir, trees and old growth, and right in the middle stood a single fence post, weathered, splintered, covered in green mold, nothing else. No trail markers, no ruins. Just that post, standing upright in the dirt like someone had planted it there to watch. The scream came again, but this time it didn't echo. It came straight from the post. Right then my stomach dropped like I'd stepped off a ledge. I stood there with my flashlight trembling in my hand, trying to rationalize it. Maybe there was a speaker buried nearby. Maybe someone was playing a trick. I walked a little closer. The air around the post felt colder. It looked like it had broken off something, jagged at the top, splinters curling out like claws. There was no sign of anything attached to it, no wires, no trails. I leaned in. I don't know why I did that, just leaned in like it might whisper something to make sense of what I was hearing. And then it screamed right into my ear, so loud it rattled the inside of my skull. I stumbled back, ears ringing, breath short, but worse than the scream was the fact that this time it said my name. Help me, John. It wasn't my dad's voice, wasn't anyone I knew, just raw and broken, like someone who'd been screaming for days. I stood there, paralyzed, while my flashlight beam shook over the trees. I told myself it had to be a prank, that someone out here knew my name from the registration logs, that maybe it was a ranger test or a field recording or hell, even a coincidence. But I couldn't move. I stayed in that clearing for what felt like hours, watching the post, waiting for it to move, waiting for someone to step out from behind a tree. Nothing ever did. Finally, I turned to leave. That's when I saw them. Boot prints. Deep, wet, pressed into the moss and dirt behind me. Not mine. They weren't there when I entered the clearing. I know that. They were darker than the soil, like they'd been made moments ago. And they led right up behind me, right to where I had been standing. I didn't look back. I walked fast and didn't stop until I reached my camp. My fire was out. That was strange. I'd fed it right before I left. But stranger still, my tent was zipped shut. I always leave it cracked, always. I opened it slowly. Nothing inside, no signs of tampering. but everything smelled different. Not bad, just wrong, like metal and old milk and pine sap. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat with my back to the fire pit and stared into the trees. The next morning, I packed fast and took a shortcut back toward my car. Didn't finish the loop. I didn't care. I passed through that same area 2 days later on my drive home and pulled into a ranger station to ask about it. Told the guy behind the desk about the screams, about the post. Left out the part about my name. I didn't want to sound crazy. He listened, nodded, then asked if the post was rotted and splintered, leaning slightly to one side. I said yes. He went, quiet, then muttered, "That's the place folks used to hang line on, back when the old mine trail ran through there. Got dug up in a mudslide back in the 80s. Weird it's still standing." I asked if other hikers had heard screams near it. He said, "Not screams. But there's been reports." "Reports of what?" I asked. He just looked at me and said, "People hear their own names out there. Usually just once. Always at night. I haven't been back to Cold Ash Bold, but sometimes I dream about that post. In the dream, I'm not alone anymore. There are others like teeth in the ground, all facing inward, and they all know my name." Story 3. Old Lights on Black Hollow Trail. In the fall of 2016, I took a week off to hike alone through the lesser-known trails that snake around Black Hollow, up near the Blue Ridge. It was the kind of solo trip I'd always talked about doing. Just me, a tent, and a silence thick enough to bury everything I didn't want to think about back home. I wasn't running from anything dramatic, just a life that had gone dull and tight around the edges. I wanted to breathe again, and the woods, they've always done that for me. Black Hollow Trail isn't on most modern maps. It used to be more active decades ago, when the fire lookout at the ridge was still in use, but it's been closed down since the late 70s. I'd only found it mentioned in an old ranger log someone scanned online. Something about moss-choked switchbacks and a lookout that leans now, like it's listening for something. That sounded perfect to me. I wanted forgotten things, stillness, a little bit of history I didn't have to share with anyone else. By the third day, I was deeper in than I'd ever been. The trail had narrowed to little more than an impression in the leaf litter. No sign of people, no rappers, no cairns, no voices. It was exactly what I'd wanted. I came across the old fire lookout by accident. It wasn't visible from the trail, just a dark wooden frame nestled up on a rocky rise, partly swallowed by vines. It looked more like a hunting blind than a tower. I climbed the short steps and peeked in. The inside was empty. Just a rotted bench, some shattered glass, and a ring of stones from an old fire pit. Someone had lived here once, watched storms roll in, radioed warnings. Maybe I slept upright against the wall when nights got too long. I decided to camp nearby. There was a clearing about 40 yards downhill where the canopy opened up just enough to pitch my tent. The sun was starting to bleed orange through the trees, and the air had that dusty, dry leaf smell that always comes before frost. I cooked a bit of rice over my burner, jotted down some notes in my trail journal, and turned in early. My tent faced uphill toward the direction of the lookout. I liked seeing it there. I felt less alone. Around 9 p.m. I saw the first light. It was faint at first, just a dim yellow glow moving through the trees near the lookout. Not steady like a flashlight, but flickering, soft, like an old lantern swaying from a hand. I watched it from inside my tent, thinking maybe it was another hiker who'd found the place after dark, but there hadn't been anyone on the trail for days. No voices, no footprints but mine. Then a second light appeared, farther to the left. Same sway, same soft color. Then a third farther off. barely visible through the branches. They didn't move like people hiking. No bobbing, no hesitation. Just slow, gliding motion. They weren't coming toward me, just drifting laterally through the trees, almost like a procession. I unzipped my tent halfway and stepped out. The cold hit hard, dry and sharp. I called out, "Hey, you alright?" But got nothing back. The lights didn't change, didn't blink or tilt. They just kept moving, keeping their slow line. I thought about going up to the lookout again, seeing if someone had lit a fire or was camping there. But something in me resisted, not out of fear exactly, just an unease. Like the woods were listening now, like the trail had turned in on itself. I stayed up for hours, watching the lights move. They never disappeared, never broke formation. At one point, I counted 8 of them, all that same dull, old-fashioned yellow, like firelight seen through a dusty jar. Eventually, I crawled back into the tent, but I didn't sleep. The light stayed visible through the mesh window, hovering in the black like slow stars. Just before dawn, I packed. I didn't bother making breakfast. I wanted distance between me and those lights. I looped back uphill to pass the lookout again on my way out. That's when I noticed the fire pit had been used. Fresh ashes, still warm. A neat pile of soot-smudged glass chimneys lined up on the bench. Old style, the kind you'd use for oil lanterns. Some were cracked, some melted slightly at the rim. None of them had been there the day before. There were no footprints, no bags, no food wrappers. Nothing to suggest someone had been there, let alone ate someone's. I didn't linger. I followed my own boot prints back down the slope and didn't stop until I was 3 miles out. I didn't tell anyone about it when I got home. What would I even say? A few weeks later, I went digging online, trying to find old photos or ranger reports about the Black Hollow lookout. I found a PDF from the mid-80s. It was mostly maintenance notes, but one entry stood out. It was dated September 1983. The handwriting was crooked, like it had been written in a hurry. Fire tower lanterns are still disappearing from storage. Can't keep glass chimneys stocked. Old trail crew swears they're being lit at night. No access roads open, no tracks found, ordered padlock. That was it. No follow-up, no explanation. I don't know who or what lights those lanterns now. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a wind trick, a glass reflection, something stuck in my brain from lack of sleep. But sometimes, when I close my eyes in the dark, I see them again. That slow row of yellow lights, gliding just beyond reach. No sound, no purpose. Just memory replaying in the trees. And I keep wondering what would have happened if I'd followed them. Story 4. The Shelter with No Journal Entries. In October of 2013, I was 4 days into a solo hike through a stretch of trail not far from Panther Creek, deep in the Blue Ridge. That time of year, the leaves were just past peak, bright fire at the edges but brittle, falling fast. There's something about walking through all that quiet decay that clears your head. Each step a soft crunch, each breath carrying the smell of wood smoke and dying things. I wasn't running from anything in particular. I just needed to be alone. Life had been busy, noisy, too many people talking, none of them saying anything worth hearing. The woods don't talk, not unless you ask the wrong questions. I hadn't meant to stop at that shelter. My plan was to press on another 3 miles to a flat spot by a creek where I knew the ground stayed dry. But the sun was already dipping low, shadows running long across the trail, and my legs had started to ache in a way that told me I'd regret pushing forward. So I cut down a small spur path toward one of the lean-tos I'd marked on my old Forest Service map. It wasn't anything special. 3 walls, a slanted tin roof, Raised platform with enough room for 2 bodies side by side if you didn't mind the smell of old sweat and mildew. But it was dry, and at that moment, that was enough. When I stepped inside, everything looked normal. A few old carvings in the beams, a ratty broom in the corner, a half-melted candle stub someone had stuck to the windowsill with wax. What struck me first was the silence. Not the good kind, not the deep woods kind. This was pressed, compressed, like the sound had been vacuumed out of the place. Even the usual night birds, whippoorwills, owls, had gone quiet. There was a logbook on the shelf near the entrance. Every backcountry shelter has one. Hikers leave notes, trail conditions, bear sightings, sometimes dumb jokes or poems scratched down during long, lonely nights. I always liked reading through them. Felt like voices echoing through time. But this one was different. It was a thick, spiral-bound notebook, fresh looking. But when I flipped it open, nothing. Dozens of pages clean as snow, not a single word. No date, no drawing, no joke, just silence in paper form. At first I figured maybe the logbook was new, but the way the edges were curled and the top cover stained made that unlikely. Someone had been handling it. Someone had written in it. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I felt like I needed to break the silence. I flipped to a clean page, wrote my name and the date, October 11th, 2013. Then I wrote, "Quiet night, all alone." That was it. Just enough to say I'd been there. I made a small fire in the stone ring out front, cooked some instant rice and jerky, and rolled out my bag on the wooden platform. By 9 o'clock, the dark had settled like ink. I lit the candle stub and watched the flame flicker against the boards. It was too quiet. Not a single snap of twig outside. No rustling. I felt like I was inside something instead of beside it, like the woods had folded in. I must have fallen asleep around 10, but it wasn't deep sleep. Not the kind that heals. I woke up maybe around 2 in the morning, not because of a sound, but because of the lack of one. Then slowly I heard it, faint at first, then sharper, scratching, coming from the wall behind my head. It wasn't animal scratching, I know that sound. This was deliberate, slow, like a nail dragged down rotted wood, one line at a time. I held my breath and didn't move. The sound circled the lean-to, not fast. One step, one drag, around and around. I had my knife in my bag. I didn't reach for it. Something about the moment felt wrong for action. Like the wrong kind of movement would make things real. Then it stopped, and something knocked. Once, on the outside of the wall behind me, just one knock. That was enough. I don't remember sleeping again, but morning came. A grey, cold light filtered through the trees. I sat up, heart still tight in my chest, and the first thing I did was look at the logbook. My entry is gone. Not torn out, not scratched through, just gone. As if I'd never written anything. But there was something else. A new line of writing on the page where mine had been, written in the same pen, same pressure, but not my hand. Don't write here. He comes when you write. I dropped the book, packed fast, didn't eat, didn't even brush the leaves off my bag, just got moving. I didn't look back at the shelter. I don't think I could have if I tried. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I figured maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd written that second line myself in some half-sleep state. Maybe the scratching was a raccoon, the knock, a branch. You learn to tell yourself those stories. But a year later, almost to the day, I passed through that same area again. I wasn't planning to stop. I just wanted to see it in daylight, see if it felt different. The shelter was gone, not collapsed, not weather damaged, burned. Charred beams still sat in the same footprint, blackened and brittle. Ash scattered across the ground like a memory trying to forget itself. On a stump near what used to be the entrance, I saw something half melted into the bark. the metal spine of a spiral notebook, twisted, burned, just the edge of one page clinging to it, white, blank. I never went back to Panther Creek after that, but sometimes I think about that page, still clinging there through frost and rain and time. I wonder if someone else will find it, if they'll write something, leave their name, a date, and I wonder what comes next, when the writing starts again. Story 5. The Boy on the Overlook. I hiked to Cradle Ridge Overlook in June of 2015, hoping to catch the kind of sunrise that made you feel like the earth was still worth something. I'd been doing a lot of solo photography trips back then, wandering through the Appalachians with my old Canon and a roll of instant coffee in my pack. The Overlook wasn't on most maps, not anymore. A guy I'd met in Asheville pointed me there over beers one night, said it was quiet enough to hear yourself stop breathing. That's the sort of poetry that sticks with you when your life's gotten too loud. So I went. I started hiking around 3 a.m, when the air still held some of that high country chill and the crickets hadn't yet passed the shift to the birds. The trail was narrow and sloped, winding up through laurel thickets and switchbacks slick with moss. I only saw one trail marker the whole way, nailed to a tree with a rusted square nail, just a yellow dot faded to the color of bone. By the time I reached the Overlook, the sky had begun its slow transformation from charcoal to rust. The view was unreal, layers of ridges folding out into the dark like waves frozen mid-crash. I set up my tripod, poured some hot water into a battered cup, and sat on the stone ledge to wait for the light. That's when I noticed him. The boy was standing barefoot near the edge, his back to me. At first I thought he was with a group, maybe someone's kid who'd wandered from a campsite nearby. But there was something off about him. The way he stood, perfectly still, hands at his sides, not fidgeting, not shifting weight the way kids do. His clothes looked dated too, brown slacks and a white button-up shirt with suspenders, like the kind of outfit your grandparents wore to Sunday school. His hair was neatly combed, and even from behind I could see the backs of his ears were pink, like he'd been out in the sun too long. I called out, soft enough not to startle him. "Hey, you okay, bud?" He didn't move, just stood there, staring down over the drop. I stood up, thinking maybe he hadn't heard me. I took a slow step toward him, keeping my voice calm. "You out here with someone? Where are your shoes?" That's when he turned to look at me. His face wasn't scared or confused, just calm, blank in a way that made my stomach tighten, like a still pond before a body floats to the top. Then he asked, "Is it still down there?" His voice was quiet, even. No fear in it, just curiosity, the way someone might ask if the stars were out yet. I looked over the edge, just trees. A sea of green stretching into the valley. Pines and oaks, maybe a few rock outcrops farther down. But nothing unusual. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. "What's down there?" I asked, turning back. But he was gone. I spun, scanned the whole Overlook. Nothing. No sound of feet running, no crunch of brush or rustle of leaves, just gone, like a frame cut out of film. I walked the edge, called out, thinking maybe he slipped behind a tree or darted down the path. But there was no answer. I must have spent half an hour searching. Eventually, I packed up and started the hike back down, the morning light bleeding through the trees in thin gold stripes. I wasn't sure what I'd seen. Maybe I'd dozed off and dreamed it. Maybe it was a weird trick of fog and shadow. Still, something about the boy's face stayed with me. Those eyes were too old for 10, like he'd been waiting a long time to ask that question. I stopped at the ranger station near the base of the ridge to check in, told myself it was just a safety thing. If someone really had lost their kid, they'd want to know. The woman behind the desk looked tired, like all park staff do after enough years of tourists and weather complaints. When I mentioned Cradle Ridge, she nodded, said most folks don't bother with it anymore. Not much of a trail left, she said. I told her about the boy, how he looked, what he asked. She didn't say anything at first, just sat real still, fingers on the desk. Then she reached down, opened a drawer and pulled out a slim brown folder. Inside were 3 sketches, pencils faded, each showed a boy. Same clothes, same haircut, same small face. One from 1987, another dated 1994. A third in a different hand, no date, just labeled Near Ridge Overlook. I couldn't speak. She flipped the folder closed and slid it back into the drawer. You're not the first, she said, but you're the first in a while. I asked what people meant by it, the thing down there. She shook her head. No one really knows. Some folks say a sinkhole, others, well, you hear things out here, stories passed around in whispers. I asked if anyone ever found the boy. She looked out the window toward the mountains like she was watching something only she could see. No, she said, but they always say the same thing. Every time. Is it still down there? I left after that, drove straight home, didn't stop. I haven't hiked Cradle Ridge since, but I think about that boy often, especially when I'm alone and the world goes quiet. I wonder how many times he's asked that question, how many people turned away before they could answer. And I wonder what I'd have seen if I'd looked a little longer over the edge. Story 6. Something walked the same loop. I hiked Bear Fence Loop in early November of 2018. Just me, my gear, and the stretch of trail I'd promised myself I'd finally do solo. I'd done day hikes there before, beautiful ridge views, mossy rock scrambles and tight trails that fold into themselves like a coiled rope. But I'd never stayed overnight. Something about the way the loop circles back on itself always gave me pause. Like walking in a circle out in the woods invites something you don't want to meet. But I was coming off a bad few months. Lost my job, broke off a relationship that had gotten too bitter to fix. And the idea of being completely alone with nothing but wind and bark and stars sounded like medicine. Quiet in, quiet out. That was the goal. I hit the trail mid-afternoon, light pack and good boots. The trail was silent except for the usual leaf crunch underfoot and the occasional gust pushing through naked branches above. Not a soul on the path. I kept thinking I'd run into someone, a couple maybe, or an older guy with trekking poles. But it stayed quiet. Almost too quiet. No birds, no chipmunks darting off trail. Just me. I set up camp a little past the halfway point. There's a small clearing tucked just off the southern curve of the loop, flat enough for a tent, with a stone-ringed fire pit that looked like it had seen use, though not recently. The ground was disturbed around it, like someone had dug up the dirt and patted it back down without smoothing it. Probably just a fire safety thing, I told myself. But there were other odd signs, arranged twigs in patterns that didn't look natural. Not quite a symbol, but almost. I found one near the base of a tree, 5 short sticks placed in a wide V, another tucked in the crook of a fallen branch. Could have been kids, could have been nothing. As dusk rolled in, I built a small fire. It wasn't cold yet, but the temperature dropped faster than I expected. I kept glancing at the edge of the woods, the direction the trail looped off into. Something about camping inside a loop makes you feel like the trail is a noose, and you're just sitting inside it, waiting for the knot to pull tight. Around 10 p.m., I doused the fire, zipped into my tent and tried to sleep. But the stillness kept me wide-eyed. No wind, no insects, just the hum of blood in my ears and the occasional pop of cooling stone outside. Then I heard it, footsteps, crunching slowly through the leaves, not fast, not stomping, just Steady, they were far at first, faint, like someone walking the trail a few hundred yards off. But the rhythm was unmistakable. Step, step, step. No voice, no flashlight, just the sound of weight pressing through the underbrush. I held my breath. Every part of me froze. The steps circled clockwise, following the trail. I listened, heart hammering, as they looped around me, far at first, then closer. The crunching paused once, near where the trail passes, just 20 feet behind that camp spot. I wanted to believe it was a deer. I told myself that over and over, but deer don't walk in perfect loops. They started again, steady, same speed, same weight, all the way around again. By the second pass, my mouth was dry. My hand had found the knife I kept by my sleeping bag. The blade felt useless in my grip, like it couldn't matter against whatever walked with that kind of patience. Then the steps stopped. No sound, no movement, just the cold knowledge that something was out there. Something walking the loop in the dark. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. The silence pressed in so thick, it felt like I'd been buried beneath it. By the time the first hint of dawn seeped through the nylon, I unzipped the tent with shaking hands. My fire ring was untouched. Nothing had been moved, but the trail, my boot prints from the day before, were still visible in the dew-damp soil. Next to them was another set, same size, deeper tread, matching mine exactly, following the entire loop in perfect alignment, step for step, 2 laps, then nothing, no prints leading into the woods, no drag marks, just gone. I didn't eat, didn't speak, just packed my things and walked the rest of the loop out, careful not to step in those second prints, like I'd disturbed something still clinging to the shape of that silence. I haven't been back since, but sometimes I think about those footprints, about whatever it was that walked the loop that night. Not chasing, not hiding, just pacing, waiting. And I can't help but wonder if someone else had left prints before mine, or if I was just next. Story 7. The Cabin Without a Trail. It was in late October of 2021 when I took a few days off to hike a lesser-known spur off the Blue Ridge. I'd found it while looking at old trail maps, real paper ones, the kind with faded corners and hand-drawn notations from rangers who've long since retired. There was a broken red line that twisted off from a main trail. No name given, no markers. I asked around at a small gear shop in Waynesboro, and the old guy behind the counter shrugged and said, "Used to be a service road back in the 50s. Eroded out. No one hikes it anymore." That was enough for me. The first day was easy walking, crisp leaves underfoot, sky like glass, not a single person in sight. The trail, such as it was, faded in and out, sometimes clear, sometimes just a suggestion between tree trunks. I'd have turned back if I hadn't been tracking it with compass bearings and a rough GPS overlay. It was a strange kind of quiet too, not peaceful, just flat. No birdsong, no rustling in the underbrush, not even wind, like the woods were holding their breath. About 6 miles in, the trees opened slightly and I saw it. A cabin. I hadn't seen a structure marked anywhere on the map. No ranger stations, no outposts. And yet there it was, nestled between 2 knotted black gum trees, wooden siding weathered but not decayed, a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney like someone had just stoked the fire. The glass in the windows wasn't cracked, just coated in dust. The steps didn't sag. It wasn't abandoned. It was preserved, too preserved. I stood there for a long while, watching. The strangest thing was the ground around it, muddy, soft from the recent rains, yet untouched. No boot prints, no tire tracks, no signs that anyone had arrived or left in weeks. Still, the smoke drifted upwards steady and thin, like the place was breathing. I approached slowly, like I might have spooked something. I knocked once, soft, more out of respect than expectation. No answer. I stepped up to the door and eased it open. It wasn't locked. The inside smelled faintly of pine and iron. The fire in the hearth was low but alive, more coals than flame. A small iron pot sat just off the heat, steam curling from its spout. To the left, a single bed with a neatly folded quilt. To the right, a rocking chair with a cushion that looked hand-stitched. A small table, on it, a plate of food. Cornbread, what looked like boiled greens, and a slice of what might have been ham. Still warm, still steaming, no utensils. I didn't touch anything, didn't step fully inside. It felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just wrong, like stepping into a conversation that wasn't meant for you. I backed away slowly and turned to leave, but the trail was gone. Where the narrow path should have been, the one I'd followed carefully for miles, there were just trees. Thick, knotted, unbroken. No gap, no flattening of leaves, no hint of direction. I turned in a slow circle, trying to orient myself. My compass spun. The needle ticked wildly before settling on the wrong direction, pointing east when I knew I'd been heading south. I walked 100 yards in 3 directions. Every time, the woods closed tighter, the underbrush grew too thick, the trees too dense. No birds, no breeze. No sound but the soft creak of the trees shifting in place. When I looked back, the cabin stood there unchanged, as if it had never noticed me at all. I didn't try to re-enter it. Instead, I camped near a mossy rock formation not far from the clearing. I didn't build a fire, didn't eat. I just sat there with my back against the stone, knife in hand, trying to stay awake. The forest stayed quiet, too quiet. At some point during the night, I must have slept, or something like sleep. I remember a sound, faint creaking, like wood rocking gently on old floorboards, then footsteps in dry leaves. Then a voice, low and rasping, just outside the circle of trees. He left the door open. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Morning came slowly. The first light through the trees didn't feel warm. It felt pale and watery. I stood up on aching legs, turned toward where the cabin had been. It was gone. Not collapsed, not decayed. Gone, just forest. No clearing, no chimney, no warmth, just roots and leaves and the faint scent of ash on the wind. I walked until my legs gave out, then kept walking. Eventually, I found a deer trail that wound toward lower elevation. I followed it, dumb and tired, until I hit a gravel service road and flagged down a passing forestry truck. The ranger was polite, maybe a little too polite. I told him what happened. He said there were no cabins out that way, hadn't been for decades. I asked if there were ever old homes or service buildings deeper in. He just looked out his window and said, "The woods out here have a way of giving back what they take, sometimes too late." I tried to retrace my steps the following spring. Same map, same gear, same route. The trail didn't exist, not even the start of it. And sometimes, even now, I'll catch the faint scent of burning pine on a still wind, or see smoke curling up behind a ridgeline where there shouldn't be any fire. I never follow it. I think about that cabin a lot. Who kept the fire going? Who set the table? And what waited for me if I'd stayed? Story 8. The Whispers Under Witch Tree Pass. I didn't grow up around Witch Tree Pass, but I'd heard the name plenty of times. Half whispered around campfires, slipped into stories like seasoning, never the main point but always there. Adding flavor, folks would say, "Don't linger near Witch Tree," or "Don't sleep too close to the burned pine." I chalked it all up to local superstition. I'd hiked half of the Blue Ridge by then, solo mostly, and nothing ever happened worse than a twisted ankle or wet gear. Ghost stories were part of the terrain. Just another thing folks brought into the woods with them. I hit that section of trail in early September, right when the days start shortening, but the heat hasn't fully let go. The pass itself sits between two ridges that run sharp and narrow, all pine and fir with a steep descent on the north end. I planned to make it over before dusk, but clouds rolled in thick and low. You can smell it when a storm's close. The bark gets sharp in your nose, like metal. I made the call to camp early, maybe a quarter mile into the pass. There was a flat shelf just off the trail, not too muddy, decent wind cover. By the time I pitched the tent, the light had gone all grey and wrong. No golden hour, no slow fade. Just a sudden dullness, like someone dimmed the whole world. I sat and made a small meal, jerky, some rice I boiled with my camp stove. Wind kept sighing through the needles overhead, that high-pitched waver that sounds like breath through teeth. It wasn't until I'd finished eating that I noticed something strange. The wind didn't die down. It just started layering. I don't know how else to describe it, like there were other sounds tucked beneath it, soft ones, conversations. At first I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, like it does when you're tired and alone and everything's damp. But the more I listened, the more I could tell. This wasn't wind. It had rhythm, flow, pauses, like murmured talk on the far end of a hallway. I held still, listened. It was all around me, just out of reach. I kept turning my head to catch a word, a sentence. Nothing clear. Not until I heard my name, plain, direct, from the trees. It didn't echo, didn't carry, it landed, right in my ear like someone whispered it from 2 inches away. I spun, flashlight already in hand, beams slicing through the trunks and underbrush. Nothing. Just trees and dark, and that breathless silence that comes after a voice stops speaking. I told myself I was tired. That stress and shadow and too much caffeine had teamed up to spook me. I zipped the tent closed, knife beside me, and tried to breathe slowly. The voices didn't stop. They thinned for a while, like they'd walked away, then drifted back in, closer, heavier. I started to pick up tones, cadence, like 2 people talking low under their breath about something they didn't want me to hear. And then again, my name. Second time, from a different angle, I snapped. Didn't even wait for full panic. I shoved everything into my pack, still half open, and shouldered out of camp with nothing but the trail ahead and a dying headlamp. I didn't care. I walked hard and fast, half blind, tripping now and then but never stopping. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was keeping pace with me just beyond the edge of the beam. I refused to look. It was past midnight when I stumbled across the tree. It stood maybe 10 feet off trail, larger than the rest, its trunk blackened like it had been hit by lightning long ago. One side was split, charred wood flaked away to expose a pale grey streak beneath. The bark looked almost oily in the flashlight's glow, and carved into the burned face of it were names. Dozens, maybe more. Some were deep and fresh, others old and softened by time. No last names, just firsts. A few had dates beside them, years mostly, stretching back decades. I don't know what pulled me toward it. I didn't want to stop. I wanted to keep walking until I reached a trailhead, a road, anything. But something made me approach. Maybe I thought I'd see someone else's name, someone I knew. Maybe I needed to prove it wasn't real. I scanned the tree slowly. That's when I found mine. There, etched neat in the black bark, same spelling, same middle initial. And beneath it, a date. Tomorrow's date. I backed away like I'd touched a stove. I don't remember breathing, don't remember turning back to the trail. I just remember moving, legs numb, mouth dry, light bobbing weakly over roots and shadow. The voices were gone now, no whispers, just silence. I walked until morning, stumbling out onto a gravel path where the trail met a Forest Service road. I sat on the edge of the ditch, sun coming up over the ridge, and I didn't feel relieved, I just felt emptied, like something had followed me all the way out and was still waiting just behind the tree line. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. When I finally did, a ranger I'd gotten to know over the years just nodded slowly and asked where I'd camped. I told him near which tree pass. He looked down at his hands for a long moment, then said, "Some places don't want to be crossed. They want to be remembered." I haven't hiked since, not alone. Sometimes I still hear my name in the wind when the weather turns. And every year, on that same day in September, I check the mirror a little closer and listen harder to empty rooms. And I wonder if the tree still has my name, or if it's already etched another.